Got the recording going? Yes. Awesome. So today we are talking about audio setup in Pro Tools. This is all about how to get your audio going in Pro Tools. And really the first thing we need to talk about when we're talking about recording audio in Pro Tools is we need to talk about the Pro Tools engine. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Pro Tools, and later on in the lesson we're going to talk about the lab and go over everything that you need for the lab. Today's lab is really a two-part lab. Today is part one, Monday is part two. Today we're going to talk about recording in Pro Tools, just record straight in, and then on Monday we're going to take the same lab and we're going to expand upon it and talk about playlists and comping stuff together. So it's pretty cool stuff. But if you want to go ahead and do everything all at once, it's all in the lab. What happens is I just give you a stopping point, like stop at number 14, and then you stop there. But okay, so we're going to go ahead and call this one Pro Tools class recording. There we go. And as usual with this, you give it a name, and you give it a file type here, WAV file, sample rate 44.1, I/O settings, stereo mix, interleaved, yes. Where is it going to go? If you want to just keep it in the same location, which I'm going to do, just keep it there, hit create, and now we've got something to record with. I'm just going to go ahead and make this a little bit bigger on my screen. Command equals to get over to the other window here and make that a little bit bigger as well. So now I've got my two windows that I can mess around with here. So as I said, the first thing we're going to do, oops, not you, get out of here. There we go. The first thing we're going to do is go up here to Setup Playback Engine. Setup Playback Engine. And this is kind of the first thing you need to do with Pro Tools. Now this is actually a kind of a 1-2 punch here. I'm going to show you this. What I've got going on here is with my Playback Engine, I've got the Universal Audio Thunderbolt connected up. That's what I use for my audio input device, my interface. But in here you're going to see there's a whole bunch of options in here, tons and tons of options. And if you are using your laptop with some headphones plugged in, we're going to have to go through how to get this set up, because a lot of people, they think of the microphone that's in their laptop as not something they can use for anything. But that's absolutely not true. I've done so many cool demos with just the microphone and a laptop. It's not even funny. You can really get a lot done with that microphone that's in that laptop. Now, it's not something you want to do professional recordings with, but it's definitely something that you want to do some just basic whatever demos and stuff like that. And I actually have recorded, and don't tell anybody this, but I have recorded piano with that microphone. Now, of course, it didn't sound great, but I twisted it, I made it sound kind of interesting, and it actually ended up being the bed for a whole song. The reason why I did it like that was because I was just in a space where there was a piano that I wanted to use, and I didn't have any microphone, I didn't have any audio interface, I didn't have anything but my laptop, so I just made the best of the situation. And this is really an important kind of point to take away, is that it's not about the gear you use necessarily, although that does have a big part of it. It really has to do with how is the song, what's going on with the song, and a little bit later I'll play that song for you. Maybe when we get to Zoom we can listen to that song. But so in here there's a whole bunch of audio interfaces, and you can see there's external microphone, external headphones. Pro Tools only allows you to have one audio interface, as opposed to Logic or Ableton Live, which allow you to have two separate audio interfaces, one for your input and one for your output. Pro Tools does not do that. Pro Tools only has one audio interface for both. So if you look on here, you're going to see it says external microphone and it says external headphones. This is the input, this would be the output if you're using a MacBook Pro or something. But Pro Tools only allows you to use one at a time. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to set up the Pro Tools aggregate here, which is going to basically allow you to have multiple interfaces in one setting. All right, so our SW says, to be honest, wait, Antonio. Okay, yeah, there you go, Antonio. Cool. And our friend SW says, To be honest, people like me can't recognize the vocal record with cheap mic and expensive mic when it's processed a lot. That's true, you know, and you're not alone there. You're not alone there. It's hard, like most people really can't recognize the difference anyway between a really nice mic and an okay mic. And what's been happening is these days, a lot of the microphones that you can buy for like $300 or $500 or whatever, which is on the cheap side of microphones, they sound really good. Like for example, the company Blue, they make some microphones that sound fantastic, and they could go up against like $1,000 microphone easily. The most important part when you're dealing with this is that you get a good, clean recording. And beyond that, it's really up to the delivery of the person performing, the performance person. So let me see here. Oh, Nico answered the question. Thank you so much. I was going to get to you in just a second here, Crispy. But yeah, playback engine. So the way we get to it is right up here under Setup, Playback Engine. Okay, so that's where we go there. Boom. So here's my playback engine. Now, one more question that SW asked. Is Pro Tools intentionally do only one setting? So yeah, Pro Tools intentionally only has one setting. That's part of the program. There's no way to get around it. So what I'm going to, well, there's no way inside of Pro Tools to get around it. So what we have to do is we have to kind of trick our computer a little bit. And let me just, before I continue on, let's just go over here to the PDF here. And this is what we're talking about here. So let's just go over the notes here real quick and just to show you what's happening here. Playback engine, this is where you set up your audio interface that Pro Tools uses. It's under Setup, Playback Engine. This will show a list of connected devices right here under Playback Engine. Anything that's connected to your computer is going to show up here. So if I go in here and I pull up my screen, here you're going to see all of my devices that I have connected to my computer right now. Now, this is a lot of stuff going on, and these are not all physical devices. Soundflower is a program, App Connect is a program, Pro Tools Aggregate, that's a program, Rekordbox Aggregate, that's a program. A lot of these are actually just software inside my computer, and it's way overkill. Like if you don't have this many things connected to your computer, great, that's actually a good thing. You don't want as much stuff as I've got connected. Like it's just confusing. The only ones that I ever really use is the Universal Audio Thunderbolt. I'll use App Connect, and I use the Pro Tools Aggregate I/O. And we're going to talk about these things right now. After we talk about this next part here, let's see here, let me just scroll. Okay, so right here is the buffer size. This is where you can change your buffer size, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. What's the buffer size? Then you don't have here, these settings here that I have set here are good settings for most applications. So let me just show you what that is in Pro Tools. Once again, if we zoom in here, the host engine, turn this button on here and ignore errors during playback and record. You want to basically check this box because it'll help Pro Tools to kind of stop, to not crash all the time. Dynamic plugin processing, yes, you definitely want to have that checked. Basically, that means that if you've got a plugin on there but no audio running through it, it's not going to utilize the power of that plugin. It's going to just have it there, and it doesn't actually put it into the CPU usage until you actually run audio through it. Video engine, you do not need to enable the video engine unless you're doing stuff with video. Kind of makes sense. Basically, leave it off unless you need it. Okay. Down here, disk playback, cache size is, just set that to normal, but if you want to, you can set this for a bigger size. I have 32 gigabytes of RAM in this computer, so I could set this to a nice big size if I wanted to, but I just let it set for normal. Lower values for the disk buffer reduce memory usage. Higher values improve disk performance. So if I'm running a lot of tracks and I'm like my hard drive is having troubles keeping up with stuff, I can set this to a big number here. But this really depends on how much RAM you have in your computer. If you've only got 16 gigs or 8 gigs or something like that, you want to leave this alone. Just set it to normal is probably going to be good here. What is up, Joe? How you doing, man? All right, so that's our playback engine. There's one more thing here I didn't really talk about too much, was that minimize additional I/O latency. If you are having troubles with like there's too much latency with your buffer size, you can go ahead and click this button here. But let's come back. We'll talk about that kind of as we go along a little bit. So as you can see right now, I've got my buffer size set to 256. I'm going to go ahead and reduce that to 128. And let's just see in, whoops, not there. There we are. Yeah, so we're going to talk about the buffer size in a second. But before we get to buffer size, yeah, Cedric, we're gonna come back and talk about the buffer size. I've got it all right here in the notes. There's a whole page dedicated to it, but let's take a second and come back to it. Before we talk about the buffer size, I want to talk about the Pro Tools aggregate I/O. Now, this is kind of a weird thing that they started making back, I think it was in Pro Tools 10, it may have been in Pro Tools 9, but basically an aggregate device, and it doesn't have to be Pro Tools aggregate, it could be any aggregate device. An aggregate device is basically a fake hardware interface for your computer. So computers, they see what's connected to it. So like right now, I've got my Apollo Twin connected to my computer. So that's my actual physical audio interface. But I also have a microphone in on the back, and I have a headphone out, and I have got some speakers, and they have some audio. You know, I can my speaker. Sorry, my internet, my webcam has a microphone built into it as well. So I actually have several microphones that are connected up to my computer. Well, what I can do is I can set up an aggregate device that pretends to be a piece of hardware that actually connects all of these actual pieces of hardware. So Pro Tools will see the one aggregate device, and that aggregate device will actually pull in everything else. So Pro Tools sees one thing, but actually that one thing is made up of several different things. And let's just kind of take a look at this picture and see how this works. So the Pro Tools aggregate I/O can combine any audio interfaces you have connected to your computer. So on a laptop, you would have a headphone out and a microphone in. These are technically two separate devices. What the Pro Tools aggregate does is inside of the aggregate, you tell it to look for the headphone out and the microphone in. So now Pro Tools sees the one device, but it actually encapsulates two different things. We can have as much stuff in this as we want. Headphone out, mic in, Elements 24, Apogee Duet, the Apollo Twin, whatever your actual hardware is. And what's cool about this is, so for example, I know that AJ, you've got the Focusrite audio interface arriving, or it already arrived yesterday or something like that. You've got that one. And that one's pretty good. But let's say in the future you want to really upgrade. Let's say you want to upgrade like really crazy to like a $2,000 like a $2,000 Apogee Symphony or something, right? Yeah, he's got the Scarlett, yep. So let's say you want to upgrade to something that costs like $2,000, but you still want to also have access to some more inputs. So you could actually have both of your audio interfaces connected to your computer and then have them set up inside of the aggregate I/O so Pro Tools can actually use all those inputs. And this is a really cool way to actually just add in more inputs or outputs into your setup without having to buy, not having to spend extra money. So for example, I've got the Apollo Twin from Universal Audio, and I've got that connected up with a light pipe in. I've got a Behringer piece that just has 8 preamps coming into it. But then when I have everything in my studio set up, I kind of want a couple more inputs. So that's when I use my older audio interface, which is an Apogee Duet. I plug that in as well. So now I have extra inputs. I have 2 more inputs because I have an Apogee Duet that's just kind of laying around at this point. So it's a really cool way to kind of use older audio interfaces for inputs and outputs if you need extra ins and outs. So let's just take a look at how we set this up. The Pro Tools aggregate I/O is set up in Apple's Audio MIDI setup. So if I have it set up here on my dock. Where is it? It's right here. I've got it in my dock here. If it's not in your dock, the place that it lives is in your Finder. You go into your Applications folder, and you go to your Utilities down at the bottom. And in here is your Audio MIDI setup. So it's in your Finder, Applications, Utilities, audio MIDI setup. And Nico says, that's sweet. So you can have multiple audio interfaces connected to Pro Tools, but they have to be bundled as an aggregate. Yes, that's absolutely right. Yep, you got it. You can have multiple things connected up, but you just have to tell Pro Tools they are one device. It's a little bit weird at first, but once you kind of go through it a couple times, you'll get it. Okay. So other DAWs I have had never let me do multiple audio interfaces. So this is an interesting thing, Nico, because actually all of your DAWs let you use aggregate devices. You just probably didn't know it. Any DAW that you have, at least on a Mac, I'm not sure about Windows machines. So let me just put that caveat in there right now. But I think Windows machines also do it. I just don't know how they do it. But basically, in any DAW now, anything that you've got, even your computer, like if I go to my Apple system prefs and I go in here and I look at my sound, even in here we can see, here's my Pro Tools aggregate. So I could have my computer be using multiple audio interfaces. I don't really know why you would do that, but you can do it. It's pretty cool. So once you actually have an aggregate device set up, you can use it for anything. So here's how we do this. In here, I go to Applications, Utilities, Audio MIDI Setup, and I go in here. Sorry, the next part is something different. And in here, you just look at what you've got connected to your computer, and you look at what you want to use. In this case, I've got everything hooked up. Right now, I'm not using my iPad, so actually I would take that out of there. My iPad's, it's connected, but it's not on. And then anything you want to use, you could use it down here. So for example, maybe I would use App Connect. I'm not sure if that's the one I would use right now though, so I'm not going to plug that in. But like Soundflower is here. You could use Soundflower if you wanted to. Anything, you can plug in any of these things, and they now become part of the audio interface that I'm going to use for Pro Tools. Yeah, Windows is not great for additional interfaces. Yeah, that's one thing. And also the other thing that I've found that's really hard to do in Windows is to move the audio around internally within the computer. So with Mac, for free, you can use Soundflower, which is really cool. That's right here. I've got it here. But then there's also a program called Loopback, which is, it's not free. It's like $60. But if you want to, let's say I'm watching a movie on Netflix and there's some sample that happens that I really want to sample from like some dialogue or something that I want to take and use in a DJ set or something. What I can do is I can actually use this internal routing system like Soundflower or Loopback, and I can connect my Netflix to my Ableton Live, and I can sample directly from Netflix into Ableton Live internally inside the computer. It's super dope. It's super fun. We're going to talk about that, but we're not going to talk about it until we get to sampling. So that's like a little, hey, here's what's down the road for you. But when we get to sampling, which is in week 10, I believe, we're going to talk all about that stuff, but not until we get to that point. So this is your Pro Tools aggregate. As you can see, I have a whole ton of things that the computer sees internally. Record box, all this stuff. These are just things that were installed in. I don't really use any of them. If you look down here in the bottom, you can actually hit the plus button and you can make your own aggregate device. Let's see here. Cedric says clock source. Yeah, the clock source in here has to do with how analog to digital works and how digital machines talk to each other. The real quick explanation is, I don't want to go too deep into it because it's like a whole rabbit hole that we could talk about, but the quick explanation is, you guys know about sample rate, and also Zach, I'm gonna get to your question here in just a second. Eduardo says, is it being recorded? Yes, it is being recorded, so it'll be up on YouTube later. So you know how the sample rate works. Basically, the sample rate is your computer is basically, the way I look at it is like taking a photo, kind of like how a movie works, right? In movies, they talk about 24 frames per second. And what that means is that a movie camera is actually like a camera. It's taking a still image of whatever's in front of it, like 24 times per second. And that's how these audio devices work as well. The audio, how it works is it's basically taking a snapshot of the sound X amount of times per second. And that's what that number means. 44,100, 44.1 kilohertz means that your audio interface is taking a picture of the sound 44,100 times per second, right? Well, when it's taking a picture of the sound, if I have two audio interfaces and this one's taking a picture like this, and it's like basically recording that sound 44,100 times per second, and my other one is also recording 44,100 times per second, if they don't line up, they're taking different pictures of the sound. So what a clock does is a clock lines them up so they're taking pictures at exactly the same time. So the waveform should be exactly the same. Now, this may sound like it's a really big deal. It's not a crazy big deal. It will be like people who have really amazing ears can hear the difference. My ears are okay. My ears are good enough, but I have a really hard time hearing the difference. And clock sources can be anywhere from like $300 up to $7,000. You can pay a lot of money for it. You could be like, I'm going to get a car. No, I'm going to get a clock source, you know. So you know, it's like, how much money do you really want to spend on this type of stuff? What kind of situation are you in? Are you doing stuff for movies? Then yeah, you're going to have an expensive one. But you can tie these in together, and that's what it's like. This drift correction stands for, and all this stuff. So these things here, in this case, my universal audio is going to be my main clock here, and these will kind of tie into it. Basically, you just want to turn your drift correction on and just leave it at that. You don't worry about it too much, and if you're still confused about everything I just said, then we can talk about it later. But again, that's a whole different rabbit hole we can go exploring on another time if we want to, or you could even talk about it in Mod 3 or Mod 4. Basically, keep this in mind. I've had stuff released, I've had stuff be, you know, hit records in Japan, I've had stuff in movies and TV shows, and I've never owned a clock source. It's, again, it's all about the music you make, not, you know, do a handful of people hear the difference, because most people can't tell the difference. AJ, you bought a clock source. Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. Sorry, honey, I bought a clock source. We're walking from now on. Yeah, you sent me to the store to buy a car, but I decided to buy an Antelope word clock. So, sorry. Well, okay. Nico says, you can't tell AJ not to buy something. All right, so what we'll do is we'll talk about options. So maybe let's keep you married, AJ. Let's not like set you on a path that's going to end up your wife saying, sorry, I just can't anymore. So let's go back to our lesson here. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of the audio MIDI setup. If we have some more questions on the Pro Tools aggregate, we can talk about it later on. All right, so the buffer size. Let's come back to the buffer size. That, if we remember, that's in here under our playback engine, and right there, playback engine, hardware buffer size, boom, right here. And you can see there's a whole bunch of options, and they all say samples. Well, that's kind of a weird word to say, samples. What does samples even mean? Well, samples is literally how the computer and Pro Tools and all this stuff, the sample rate, right? We talk about the sample rate in Pro Tools, in audio, digital audio, 44,100 samples per second. You're still saving money for auto-tune and fab filter bundle. Yeah, I hear that, man. Just knows those things as latency. Well, essentially, SW, you're right, and we're gonna wrap back around to that word latency. But remember, 44,100, that's our sample rate, right? That's we say 44.1 kilohertz. That's our sample rate. Well, if it's taking a sample per second, well, those samples per second. Zach will come back to that question in just a bit. So samples per second, right? What happens with these is that those actually samples can be measured in kind of a distance or a time. So if we look up here at the top of my Pro Tools screen, and I don't want you to change your Pro Tools setup at all because really you don't need to see this, but there is an option here for samples. So if I have audio, let me just get a piece of audio and throw it in here real quick. Let's see, where's my audio? I'm gonna go grab some audio from the lab we did yesterday. And I'm just gonna grab, here, let's just grab this bass line and throw it in. Move it over here to the beginning, and let's zoom in on this bad boy. I'm gonna make this fit to window, boom, it's huge. And, okay, you were just recording. So if I keep zooming in on this, watch this. We start to see, let's go and use my samples here in my grid mode. Let's set this to samples. So now, we're gonna set the grid to a really small samples, 10 samples here. And so each one of these lines is actually 10 seconds of time. Right now, see, I can click and drag it, and that's 10 seconds. If I keep zooming in, we can see here, I can get it down to 10 seconds. Here, let's get it to 1 second. One sample. So this is one sample. So I'm actually, with each one of these grid lines, I'm actually looking at one of those samples, 44,100 samples per second, right? So 44,100 of these little grids would make up 1 second. Now, that's crazy. That's a lot of samples. So I never really use the samples here for stuff very much, but you can see this is my waveform. If we zoom way in on it, that's my waveform, right? And you can see how it goes there. So this is what it's stepping at right here. Each one of these is a sample, right? So what this is saying here is this playback engine right here is saying the buffer size is 128 of these samples. So let's go and grab 100. Set my grid to 100 samples. Boom. There's my grid set to 100 samples. So 128 is like about here, right about there. That's about 128 samples, give or take. And as you can see, I can actually highlight this. So it's actually a moment in time. That's what our samples are in here for the hardware buffer size. Now, the buffer size, what it basically means is how much time the computer is given to think about things. That's what your buffer size actually means. How much time the computer is given to think about things. So I have my keyboard controller right here, keyboard controller, and I press a key on my keyboard, and then the computer, it tells the computer to do something, right? And then I hear the sound back to me. So what that is that's kind of the, you know, like how there's like the, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. You learn that stuff in school and it talks about energy and stuff like that. Well, this is kind of the same thing. Every time I do something on my keyboard, it's gonna do something back to me. Well, that's the buffer size, is how much time we get to think about that. And that creates what we call latency. And this is what SW was talking about. He just knows those things, that person just knows those things as latency. So the latency, if we look down here on the bottom of my screen, the action and the result, the time between it is latency. So the buffer size is the space that happens in here inside the computer of how much time the computer is given to think about stuff. I think of it as like a box. There's a box, and the smaller my buffer size is, the smaller is the box. Here's my box, and if I have a small box like this, it's a low buffer size. If I have a bigger box, it's a bigger buffer size. Now, this box for me is kind of like a sandbox for a child to play in. The child is super happy, he's got all this like space to play, yay. But if I give him a bigger box, it's like, wow, cool, now I can do so much more stuff, and they could build a bigger sandcastle or whatever, right? Well, this is what's happening with your computer. If I have a small buffer size set in terms of samples, so the smaller the number, the smaller the buffer size. I have a smaller buffer size here. Two things are going to happen. One, it has a quicker result because the action and the result are really close together, but it has less power because it's less processing time. Remember, it's a smaller box. It's a smaller space to do stuff. It doesn't have as much time to think about things. It doesn't have as much, it can't stretch out and be like, okay, I'm going to figure this problem out. I'm going to make a bigger room. I'm going to make a whatever. It has this little tiny area. So it's like this little small area that it has to think about things. So it's like, okay, I can do things faster because it's smaller, but I can't do as much because I don't have as much space to work with. I don't have as much time to think about things. Right? Well, if we make that box bigger, if we make the time longer, we're saying, okay, you have more room to work, you have more time to think, you can do more stuff. But what happens is now there becomes more distance between when I play the key on my keyboard to when I hear the result. So that creates more latency. A bigger buffer size, as we get bigger with our buffer size, we create more latency. And the latency here, it's going to be harder for us to play and to do things in real time. We can do more things, but we can't do them as quick. So here we have down here at 128, so at 64, it's great, quick result, but less processing time. 128, it's good for a live performance, but we can use less plugins. We don't have as much space to think, so we can't use as many plugins. Here at 512 and 1024, it's larger, we have a slower result, but we have more processing power. So down here at 1024, you can see on my screen, it's better for mixing, but it's not as good for live. So when I'm working, if I'm making my beat, I would go up here to my playback engine and I would set my playback engine, the buffer size to 128. 128 is what I find to be about the magic number, a good balance between them, okay? If I'm mixing and I'm hearing some pops and cracks and I'm not playing anymore, I've already made my beat, the beat is good, it's good to go, it sounds okay, now I'm mixing the beat, I'm working to make it sound even better, then I would take my buffer size and I would put it up here to one of these higher numbers. And that way my computer has more time to think about things, but it's not good for playing. But that's okay because I'm done playing. Now I'm just kind of like EQing and mixing and compressing and stuff like that. That's how that works. Now I saw a question here. Zach says, does your buffer size affect recording quality? The answer is no, it does not. Ish. So the buffer size does not affect the recording quality. But if you have a low buffer size and you have a lot of stuff happening, what's going to happen is your computer is going to pop and crack like that. You're going to hear it. It sounds like, I don't know, it sounds like digital just crackling and popping. So that might end up in your recording. So that's how it would affect the recording. But it's all still, it's going to be a good sound. It's just going to have some pops and crackles in there. And then SW says, but it affects the time. And it does affect the time. So if you have a higher buffer size and you're recording some vocals, and I'll show you this in a second once we start recording stuff. But when you have a higher buffer size and you start recording, what you might have to do is later you might have to go back and put those things, like realign them a little bit. It's not a huge big deal, but it does change things around a little bit. But keep in mind also, Pro Tools, if we look here, if I go to my delay compensation, Pro Tools actually, it does work with delay compensation kind of, it's a little bit different, but in here we do have some plugins to help us kind of deal with stuff if you wanted to. Kind of depends on how you want to set stuff up, but if, for example, if I go in here to my plugins and go to my delay, let's see, is it this one? This is one you don't have access to actually. Hold on, other trim, multi, let's go to delay. In here there is a plugin from Pro Tools that is your delay. Maybe it is that one. This is the kilohertz plugin, yeah. This is, yeah, so I mean, there's one that actually does come with Pro Tools. I don't remember which one it is. I mean, I thought it was right here. But it's basically just maybe they consolidated it. Hold on, let's see. I'm just seeing if it's in here for some reason. No, it's not there. But so if we look on here under the Pro Tools delay, mod delay 3, this one, you could use this. This is not the one I was thinking about, but I don't see the one I was thinking about on this version of Pro Tools. I'll have to look and see. But basically, you can set this delay here for like, 2 milliseconds or something, whatever the sample rate is. And like I said, the one I'm thinking about actually would be in samples, not in this one. It's weird. It's not. I don't see it right here. Oh, time adjuster. Here it is. This is it. Time adjuster. Now, time adjuster is essentially a delay, but it's a delay that does things in terms of samples. So we can go to 4 samples like this. So you can see here, we could offset things by 16 samples. So if I know how much stuff is offset, I can use this time adjuster on all my tracks. Oh, Nico found it. Yeah, cool. And yeah, so that's how we can do that. And then Cedric says, I bought WaveTune yesterday and I don't know how to use it. Okay, that is really off topic. We can come back and talk about that another time. Maybe in Zoom I can show you how to use it. And then Moises says, yeah, Cedric, we're going to talk about we can talk about WaveTune or something somewhere else. I don't want to go down, that's a whole different thing. But just how do you use any plugin, just real quick, because just talking about plugins in general, just click on your inserts here, and then you can use it in here. But WaveTune, I'm not sure how that one works. I guess that one works in real time, but it should just be here under pitch shift. Or it might be, you can see here I've got all my stuff in here, but Melodyne is not here. So Melodyne is under, for me, I think it's under here, under other. So you might want to look under other, or for you can go look under waves. I don't have the wave stuff in here. So, and then Moises says, after increasing the buffer size for mixing, do you set it back to a smaller rate? No, you wouldn't. Just leave it up. So it's actually the opposite direction. What I do is I always do I make my beats with a smaller buffer size, and then when I'm done making the music, when I'm done actually making the music and it's time to mix it and I'm focused on mixing, when I took off the beat maker hat and I took it off and I put on my mix engineer hat, then I increase my buffer size back up to a higher number, and I never put it back until I'm ready to work on another song. And then SW says, I'm confused. If you want to record in a high buffer size, shouldn't I need a plugin to pre-shift the time rather than... Yeah, it's a bit confusing. What you're going to do is actually use that delay plugin on all your other tracks, which is a huge pain. So the right way to do it, honestly, well, not right way to do it. The best way to do it is to not have any latency at all, as little latency as possible. But that's maybe not a possibility. So what you would do is when you're done recording stuff, yeah, not that you don't put it on the record channel, you put it on all your other tracks to offset them to match whatever offset your recorded track is. So if my recorded track has a latency of 500, thing like that, so no such thing that pre-shift the record time. Well, that's actually not true. If you're doing stuff in real time, then the answer is no. Or the answer is right. You're right. Sorry. So your question is, so there's no such thing that pre-shift the record time. And the answer is correct. But nowadays, these computers, these programs are pretty smart. And if you have your audio is in the track and everything's already been recorded, this delay compensation down here can actually offset stuff for you, plus or minus. So there are things that can make things go before, but it's not for real time. It's for like anything you have recorded already. So for example, compressors now have a feature called look ahead. And that look ahead feature in compressors and limiters and stuff like that is actually previewing the audio as it comes through, So it's actually looking into the audio ahead of the audio, which is something that a hardware compressor cannot do at all. It's like impossible for a hardware compressor to do. But the software compressors can do it because they can actually see the audio that's coming through. So they are kind of looking ahead at it. And so with everything being recorded, sure, you could tell the computer, hey, look at what's about to happen and just pre-shift it a little bit. But not when you're working in real time. Not when you're like actually actively recording stuff and things like that, it would be hard to do. All right, so, yep, yeah, that's what it does. And that's why they use look ahead to kind of help with like helping your transients and stuff like that. It kind of can mess around with the transients and stuff in a way that physical compressors can't do. All right, so where are we? The buffer size. Okay, so buffer size, I feel like that's pretty good. The main thing to take away from buffer size is this. Smaller buffer sizes, here, let me just go here into this here. So a smaller buffer size is good for playing, good for recording, stuff like that. A bigger buffer size is good for mixing. That's everything I just said boils down to those right there. Bigger buffer size, better for mixing. Smaller buffer size, better for recording and playing. Essentially, that's what's up. All right, did I get to all the, sorry, y'all were firing some questions pretty quick at me. But I think I got to most everything. If I didn't, please let me know. I am sweating in here too. It just got really hot. I'm a bit concerned. I might have to turn the fan on in here, guys, because I don't want my computer to overheat. All right. And that everything I just talked about is right here in the notes. 64, 128, 52, 56. These numbers are great for recording and composing. 512, 1024, 2056. These numbers are great for mixing. Remember, you can change the buffer size in the beginning when you're mostly writing and playing. Use a smaller buffer size later. When you're mixing, change to the larger buffer size. And how do you know when that time comes? If you're hearing some pops and clicks and stuff like that, the more modern computers, like I had, before I was working with this Mac Mini, I had an iMac from 2011 or 2012, and I used that up until last year, 2019, and that thing was still just laughing at everything I threw at it. It was just like, ha ha ha, you think that you can overpower me, you can't. And no problems at all. I never had to adjust my buffer size. The only thing that took that computer down was literally just the power supply on it broke. And I needed to buy a Mac Mini anyway for my trip to Thailand. So I did that. Oh my God, I'm sweating, sorry. I had it for my trip to Thailand, so I just went ahead and replaced it. I still have it, so I might still try to fix it. All right, import audio. 2056 mixing the Ableton, I can see the sound when it doesn't match. Yeah, it is gonna happen. So at 2056, it's gonna get weird. You just kind of have to shut your eyes. Hopefully you don't have to use 2056, because if you don't need to use the higher buffer size, don't use the higher buffer size. Only if you need to use it. But at 2056, you're gonna notice it, even from mixing, and it can get weird. So if you're working on like a older computer and you have to use 2056 because you just have so many plugins happening, then just kind of close your eyes and listen. And try not to let it affect you too much. All right, real quick, import audio. This is just about pulling audio into Pro Tools. We did this yesterday, actually. This is part of our lesson yesterday, Command-Shift-I. When you hit Command-Shift-I in here, it pulls up this window here, and I can pull stuff in the EP loop over here. Just a couple things when you are importing audio. It does show you your wave, your file type, your length, your size in megabytes, bit depth, sample rate, and how many channels it is. 2 channels is stereo. Over here you have add and copy. Now add, some explanations of these real quick, is add imports the audio into the session without copying it. It saves hard drive space. Copy makes a copy of the original file and imports it into the audio files folder, which is safer. But just remember at the end of it, you can always use save copy in. So SW says, most annoying thing about Pro Tools, why don't they let us drag and drop? Actually, you can drag and drop, and that's what I usually do. I'm just talking about this stuff so that you have options, but for example, if I have my audio files here, I don't need that open anymore. So down here I've got my audio files. Let's put Pro Tools into shuffle mode. And down here I'm going to just drag these stuff in. Here's my audio files down here. I'm just going to drag these in, boom, and it makes its own tracks, and it just puts everything at the beginning because it's in shuffle mode. So now everything's right there, ready to go. Now, I don't know how long you've been using Pro Tools SW, but this is kind of a good thing just for everybody to understand. The question that you bring up is a great question, but it's an old question. Why doesn't Pro Tools let us drag and drop? And you're absolutely right. Pro Tools used to not allow you to drag and drop stuff into it, but now you can drag and drop stuff in. And it's been a while. Like, you know, I think they've been allowing drag and drop since like version 9 or 10. I don't remember exactly when they added it in, but now we can use drag and drop no problem at all. So anything you want to drag into it, just drag it in and you'll be good to go. Hold on, let me put my grid back to bars and beats and 1. Okay, cool. All right. I do not want my grid to be in samples because that's annoying. All right, so as you can see, I just dragged and dropped all my music in here, and it works fine. What it does is it'll name the track based on your file, and it will also create the right, like mono versus stereo, the right number of channels for that track. All right, so this one here, SRC, sample rate conversion. If you need to convert to a different sample rate, then you'll need to use the SRC conversion. It'll really help things to sound better. That's in your import audio as well. Drag and drop from Finder. You can drag and drop an audio file from a Finder window into 2 locations in Pro Tools. You can drag it into the edit window, onto a track, or into the gray space, or the clips list. Now, one thing here, the pink part here about dragging something onto a track, and I talked about this yesterday, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but let's say, for example, that I got all these files here. They're not in here. You can see, if we look at these ones here, these first couple ones are mono, and these are stereo, and this one down here is mono as well, and these are stereo. The mono files can only accept, the mono tracks can only accept mono, and the stereo tracks can only accept stereo. And this is something, going back to what SW said about why don't they let us just drag and drop, this is an annoying thing with Pro Tools, is that in Ableton Live, it doesn't care if it's mono or stereo, it just puts it on the audio track. On Logic, it'll actually change it for you. Or you can change a track from mono to stereo by clicking on the little circle. There's like a little circle thing on the tracks in Logic. And maybe I can show it to you later on, but you can actually change from mono to stereo in Logic by clicking on that circle. In Pro Tools, if I make a mono track, it's a mono track. I can't change it later. In Logic, and if it's a stereo track, it's a stereo track. I can't change it later. Now, before we move forward, let me just make sure that Pro Tools hasn't changed anything with that, because I think it's still true, but Pro Tools has been changing things, and if you're not paying attention, something that you used to think was true is now going to be the opposite, because they have been changing stuff. So let me just make sure that they haven't made some kind of feature where change it from this to that. Now, while we're talking about this though, let me just show you what I mean by this. So here I've got a mono file, and I can drag it onto the mono track here. I could also drag it onto this mono track, but I cannot drag it onto these stereo tracks. See, it won't let me, but I can drag it here, I can drag it down here, but not here, because that's the wrong track count. Same thing with a stereo file. If I have a stereo file, I can drag it onto this stereo track, or this stereo track, but not these, and this is weird. I can actually drag it onto here, but see what it did? It split that stereo file into 2 mono files, which is weird, right? But that's how Pro Tools does it. So a stereo file, if I have 2 mono tracks right next to each other, I can drag it on there. But now it puts it into a split, right? And then SW says, so if I need to change a mono track to stereo or the other way around, I have to make a new audio track. Yes, you have to make a new audio track and move the clip, kind of. But check this out. I can, this is a cool feature. This is something that only Pro Tools does. And this is one of the reasons why I love Pro Tools, because even though there's like these weird things that we're talking about, that's like, wait, why can't I just do that? You can't just do that. But check this out. What Pro Tools does that the other DAWs do not do is if I have a stereo track here, I can right click on it and go split into mono. And now what it does is it creates two mono tracks from that stereo file. So this is great if I'm working with like a kick drum that for some reason is been made into stereo, and like it's from a sample pack and it's like a stereo file. And I don't want it to be a stereo file, I want it to be a mono file. I want it to be true mono. Well, in Pro Tools, I can actually make it true mono really easily by just right clicking, split to mono. I delete these tracks like this. And now I have my mono track here. And that's the mono audio. That's super, super cool for dealing with low frequency things like kick drums and basses and stuff like that. So if you're bringing stuff over from Ableton Live or Logic and you just did like a bounce, a stem bounce in Ableton Live, it's just gonna make everything stereo. That's taking up a lot of extra processor power and stuff on your track count and in your plugins. So my advice is basses and kick drums, turn them into mono. It doesn't take that long in Pro Tools. Let me do that one more time. I'm gonna grab my EP loop, drag it down here into my EP here. Boom, there it is. It's stereo. I right click, go to split into mono. There it is, split into mono, and it creates two mono files for me. Super, I just go ahead and delete those two. I don't need them all. And boom, there we go. Super cool, super easy to do. I love that feature. It's actually one of my favorite features of Pro Tools that differentiates Pro Tools from the other DAWs like Logic or Ableton Live. Now, don't get me wrong, and you're gonna see this in a couple weeks, I still use Ableton Live all the time for making my beats, but stuff like this is why if I was recording bands Zach, you know, kind of reflecting on a question that you asked me yesterday, Logic versus Pro Tools. For you, like I said, Logic because you know it better. You just need to get stuff recorded, that you have a finite amount of time. But I actually prefer Pro Tools because of little things like this. And for me, Pro Tools, like you can do everything in Logic. Logic does everything, but Logic, it's like it does too much. It's like it does everything, and because it does everything, there's some things that it doesn't do as smoothly or as well as Pro Tools. So, utility gain, waves, S1, stuff like that. Let me see here. SW says, does it sound different between a stereo split sound into mono and a stereo sound turned into mono by a stereo imager? That's a good question. The answer would be, yeah, maybe. If you take a stereo sound and make it become mono, you could get phasing issues. You could get some like weird things happening with phase stuff. So be aware of that. And you just have to pay attention to it because most of the time it's not going to be a problem, but it would sound a little bit different because remember, if you're taking two things and you're splitting it into mono, let me just do it one more time here. Hey. Stop. I don't need to rename anything. If I'm going to split things into mono, it's literally splitting the signal. So if there's something on the left-hand side and I only take the right-hand side, I'm not going to hear that stuff on the left because it's not merging things. It's actually splitting things apart. So in this case here, if I just take this file over here, now I'm only hearing the right side. Anything that was on the left, I'm not hearing it at all. Whereas if you take a utility gain in Ableton Live or Waves S1 or something, the imager, then you're actually taking those two signals on the left and the right and you're mixing them together. And so you're going to hear everything, but now it's going to be kind of compressed into the middle portion. That can create some problems. Whereas if I have these twos over here, it can create some problems, but it also can help some problems too, because like I've definitely had some synthesizer sounds where I'm like, I don't want to make it I don't want to lose what's happening on the left and the right. I just want to combine it into one image in the middle. So using it like that. Now, how would you do that in Pro Tools? It's actually really easy to do in Pro Tools. You don't need a plugin in Pro Tools. What you need to do in Pro Tools is if I have a stereo track here, drum loop here, see how the pan pots are left and right? I just hold Option and click them, and now it's mono. So in Pro Tools, if you want to keep it, if you want to keep both the left and the right image, but you just want to make it mono, just put the pan pots in the middle here. You don't need a plugin. With Logic, you need a plugin. With Ableton Live, you need a plugin to make it mono. With Pro Tools, you don't need a plugin. You just need these pan pots here. Okay. Just one other thing, SW, I just want to address to you and to anybody else, because there are some people I know in my class who have experience with Ableton Live. With Ableton Live now, you can right-click on the pan pot and it will split it into two pan pots, the same as Pro Tools. So you can do it like this in Ableton Live nowadays. It's a new feature from Live 10 point something. But if you right-click on the pan pot in Live, you can split it to two pan pots and work with it like you do with Pro Tools. So yeah, this is a really cool feature in Pro Tools. It's another thing that I really like about Pro Tools. You could also flip the pan. So let's say I've got, and I've done this before, where I've got like a drum loop and it's got like a hi-hat over here, but I already have some stuff in my mix that's over here. I want to put the hi-hat over here. You just literally just go here to your pan pots and just flip them. Just click and drag it, and there you go. Bada boom, bada bing. So there's a lot of really cool stuff we can do here with this. All right, let's move on from this stuff here. Okay, so just going back to this, that's the pink part there, splitting to mono. The green part here says, and this is this part here, the gray space. When you drag an audio file into the edit window's gray space, it will automatically create a new track with the correct number of channels, and it will move the track to the same name. It will name the track the same name as the audio file, which I already talked about a minute ago. Okay, let's do this. Before we get into recording here, let's take a break. Let's take a 10-minute break, because get some, stretch your legs, whatever. I'm gonna turn on the AC, get this room cooled down a little bit. A 10-minute break, and then we're gonna come back and we're gonna talk about these record modes, and I'm actually gonna do some recording, and we're gonna go through the lab and stuff like that. All right, so this is a good place to take a break. Yep, drink some coffee. Absolutely. Cool, so where's my thing here? Let's put this on here. All right, y'all, so I'm gonna stop.